Growing Up on a Farm in Kentucky. Stories by Stan Schmidt. Episode 19. Pitching Hay.
At a very young age, my dad would put all 5 of us boys to work doing things you wouldn't expect little kids to do. Like when you're 6 or 7 years old, he would have us help with haying, which is pretty rough work. And in those days, we put it up loose. We would mow it and then rake it when it was dry into rows. And then instead of baling it, we would pick it up. We have a thing called I guess it was called a hay loader or something, but it would pick up the hay and run it up a chute and then drop it onto the wagon. So Dad would be up on the wagon, and one of us would drive the 2 mules pulling on the whole contraption, and then 2 of us would be stomping the hay down and rearranging it when it came off the chute. My dad would just pick up a huge amount of hay with a pitchfork and just throw it right on top of you. And you had to climb on top of it and stomp it all down, and then, because another one was coming really fast. And I still remember as a little kid trying to climb up through that dusty hay. It was green. I guess you got some in your lungs at an early age. And stomping it down in that hot summer heat until you loaded the whole wagon full of loose hay. And then we'd take it into the barn, and the barn had this overhang. There was a rail that went down the rib of the barn roof, and on it was wheels that attached to a kind of roller and a big fork, and the fork was attached to a rope, and it dropped down into the wagon outside the barn. And then you'd stick that fork deep into the hay. You had to push it in with your feet and then pull these 2 little triggers that caught the hay. And then when the rope went all the way the length of the barn, on the other end of the barn was 2 mules that pulled the rope, would pull the hay straight up. And then when it got to the top of the barn, something clicked in there, and then it would start pulling it into the barn. And then when it got into the barn, we would have people in there that shoved it to one side or the other, and we had a little small trip rope. You pulled the trip rope and it would all fall into the barn. And that's how we loaded hay. And I still remember the day my older brother Frank was holding on to that big rope that was pulling the hay up, and he didn't notice, and his hand got caught in the pulley. He was basically hanging by his hand on top of this big load of hay, and we had to reverse it. And reversing 2 mules took a little while, backing them up and lowering the hay back down the wagon and getting his hand out of there and taking them to a doctor. He was always accident prone, and I'd never had anything happen to me, but one time he wanted to make a bow and arrow, so he climbed a tree with a double-edged axe, and he hooked the axe on a limb up above himself. And then he started climbing up, and the axe fell off the limb and put a big gash in his forearm. Blood all over the place, running into the house screaming. My mother had to deal with she had 6 kids and had to deal with things like that. It was a zoo. I don't know how my parents survived it.